Hi, my name is Carla. I am a registered nurse, and this lesson is going to be focusing on rounding. Well, maybe you haven't been doing rounding since elementary school, but now you are in a healthcare career where they expect you to do rounding. And not only that, but they want you to pass this math test and be very precise, because even if you get the answer correct, but you round wrong, they're going to mark it wrong. And the reason this is so important, that rounding is so important, is because especially with pediatrics, you have to be very precise in your dosages. So sometimes we have to round to a hundredths value. Now we're going to take a look at a place value chart first so that you can see what I'm referring to when I say the hundredths place. So looking at this place value chart, you can see right in the center that we have something that's mentioned as a decimal. Well, decimal is a dot. And it's this dot that you commonly see in numbers like here in question number 1. You see that dot, that decimal point between the 4 and the 5. Now this decimal point is going to be important to letting you know the value of a number. It's going to let us know whether a number is a whole number or if it is a fractional part. Well, fractional part, what does that mean? That means that it is not whole. For example, here in the place value chart, the fractional parts are the tenths, hundredths, and thousandths to the right of the decimal point. So for example, if I have an apple and I cut it and I give you part of that apple, that part of the apple that I gave you would be a fractional part because it is not a whole apple. So let's take a look now here to the left of the place value chart. So to the left of the place value chart, you see hundreds, tens, and ones. These are whole values. A whole value would mean that it does not have a decimal point in the number. It does not have a fractional part. It does not have part of a whole number. So this is important when you do nursing or healthcare dosage calculations, because you have to be able to identify whether a number is a whole number or whether you need to round to a specific value, like the hundreds, hundredths, tenths, all of those. Those are the common ones that you'll see that you round to the tenths and the hundredths. So now let's take a look at an example. So here in question 1, I see tenths, that I need to round to the tenths. So my value given is 4.56. So let's say that you do a math problem and your final answer is 4.56 and they ask you to round to the tenths. So how do you round to the tenths? Well, you look at the number first, 4.56. I have to figure out which of those numbers, the 4, the 5, or the 6, is in the tenths place. So let's go back to the place value chart. The tenths place is a number directly one space to the right of the decimal point. So which number in here in the 4.56, which number is directly to the right of the decimal point? Well, I can see here that that 5 is in the tenths place. So to round to the tenths place, that means that this value is either going to stay as a 5 or it is going to go up to the next value, which would be 6. So how do I determine whether this stays as a 5 or a 6? Well, I have to look now to the number directly to the right of the number that I am trying to round to. So remember, they said they want us to round to the tenths. So what number is directly to the right of the tenths? Well, the hundredths is directly to the right of the tenths. And in this example, 4.56, the 6 is the number directly to the right. So that 6 is going to tell me whether I'm going to round up, change that 5 to a 6, or I'm going to round down, meaning that 5 is going to stay as a 5. And with rounding, essentially what happens is that the number that they're asking you to round to is the last number that you should see in the value. For example, here, I should either end up with either 4.5 or 4.6. Any other values to the right of that are going to be changed to 0. And we don't even need to write that because those are what we call trailing zeros. So trailing zeros are like unnecessary zeros that you add to the right that we don't need anymore. Those we can get rid of. So looking at this, 4.56, let's remember again the rules. You find out first what is in the rounding value that they want. Here they want tenths. So we figured out that the 5 is in the tenths place. The next step is to figure out which number is directly to the right of it. And here we said that the hundredths is the 6 here that I highlighted in blue. So the 6, now how do we figure out? Does that mean 6, does that mean that we're going to round up? Or does that mean that we're going to round down? Well, according to your rounding rules, if a number is 5 or above, that means that you are going to round up. If a number is 4 or below, that means that you are going to round down. So for example, here, 6, is that 5 or above? Yes. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those are numbers 5 or above. So 6 is in that category, so we would round up. What does that mean? That 5 that I highlighted in green rounds up to the next value, which would be 6. So my final answer for this one would be 4.6. Now remember, all of the values to the right would just be 0 if I had any values. I don't have any values here. I'm just going to leave it here as 4.6. I don't need those trailing zeros. So my final answer for this one would have been 4.6. Let's take a look at another example. So let's take a look at question number 2. So for question 2, we have been given a rule that we need to round to the hundredths place. And for the hundredths place, we need to figure out which value is in the hundreds. So let's look at our chart again up here. So in the hundreds, that is 2 spaces to the right of the decimal point. So 2 spaces to the right of the decimal point. Looking at our value here, 9.392. If I go 2 spaces to the right of the decimal point, 1, 2, that means that the number 9 is in my hundreds place. So we figured out the first part of rounding. So we figured out that the 9 is in the hundreds place. That means that every value after that is going to be eliminated. We don't need to add any zeros. We don't need to add any of those trailing zeros. So that number in the hundreds will be the last value that I need to see in this number. Now, looking at this, 9.392, how do I know whether I'm going to round up or down? Well, again, I have to figure out which value is directly to the right of the value that I'm trying to round to. So remember, we're trying to round to the hundredths place. So let's take a look here. What is in the hundredths place? The 9. What is to the right of it, which is going to tell me what to round to? That would be the thousandths. So the thousandths in that 9.392, the value in the thousandths is a 2. Okay, so now I figured out the number directly to the right. That's the second step in the rounding rules. The third step is to figure out, does that 2 belong in the section of 5 or above or in 4 or below? Well, 4 or below, because 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 are going to be in that bottom category that make us round down. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that your 9 that we're trying to round to gets changed to 8. That means that that 9 stays as a 9. So this 9 will stay as it is as a 9, and everything to the right of it is going to get eliminated. So you don't need to add those zeros. So finally, for this answer, I would end up with 9.39. Remember, the last value I should see should be in the hundredths place because that is what I'm rounding to. So is it in the hundreds? Let me see. 1, 2 spaces to the right of the decimal point. 1, 2 spaces to the right of the decimal point. Yes. So I am in the hundredths place, and that's what I need. That's my final answer for this one. Okay, let's take a look at another example here. So for question 3, they're asking me to round to a whole number. Well, rounding to a whole number, essentially all it means is that we're rounding to the ones place, especially when you're looking here in nursing, if they or healthcare, other healthcare fields. If you're rounding to a whole number, you need to have essentially no decimal points showing up. That would be rounding to a whole number. So here, for example, I have 4.38. I see a decimal point right here, 0.38, and I don't want that. They want me to round to a whole number. So what is my first whole number value when I look at the place value chart? Well, the first whole number that I see under the place value chart is going to be the ones. So ones, if I round to the ones, I am finally in the whole number. I have to make sure that there are no decimal points. So the first one, that value that makes it a whole number would be the 1. So we're rounding to the 1. So if you see round to a whole number, essentially we're rounding to the ones place. So looking at this number, 4.38, which number is in my ones place? Well, my ones is one place to the left of the decimal point. So which number here is one place to the left of the decimal point? The 4. So my 4 is one place to the left of the decimal point. That is my whole number that I'm going to round to. It's in my ones place, like we said. So how do I figure out? We did step 1. We figured out which value we're rounding to, which based off the place value chart. The second step is to figure out which number is directly to the right of that. So here, the number directly to the right is going to be the 3. And what place is that in? That 3, that is in our 10th place. So that 3 is in our 10th place. So that 3 is going to determine whether we are going to round up or down. So we did step 2. We figured out which number is directly to the right. That's a 3. So this 3 will tell me whether I round up or down. Now the third step is going to be determining whether that 3 is in that 5 or above or that 4 or below category. So 3 is in that 4 or below category, right? 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So this means that we are going to be rounding down. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that 4 changes to a 3. That means we keep the 4 as it is. When you round down, that means that you leave the value that you are rounding to as it is. When you round up, that means that that value that you are rounding to would go up to the next value. So in this example, 4.38, our final answer would be 4. Let's look at some other examples just to get some practice and then see it in a word problem just to make it a little bit more complicated. So let me scroll down a little first. Okay. So for question 4, it says medication dosage rounding. The prescribed dosage of a medication is 3.25 milligrams. For practical administration, round the dosage to the nearest 10th of a milligram. So 10th, that is what we are rounding to. Remember, step 1, determine which value is in the 10th place from the number they gave you. So the number they gave us is 3.25. So 3.25. Which number is in the tenths? The tenths is the number directly to the right of the decimal point, if you look back at the place value chart. So that's the 2. So that is the number we are rounding to. That means that that number that we end up in the tenths place should be the last number that I see in this equation here, in this formula. So what determines whether I round up or down? The number directly to the right. So that 5, this 5 here, this tells me whether I'm going to round up or down. So 3.25, is it in the 5 or above or 4 or below? It's in the 5 or above. That means we're rounding up. That means that 2 should go to the next value up, which would be 3. And then anything after that 3 will be eliminated. I don't need to add any trailing zeros. So my final answer for this one would have been 3.3, and don't forget your unit, milligrams. 3.3 milligrams. That would have been my final answer for this one. Let's take a look at the next one. So for question 5, it says IV infusion rate rounding. A patient is receiving an IV infusion rate of 47.8 milliliters per hour. Round the infusion rate to the nearest whole milliliter per hour. So we need to figure out our nearest whole number. So whole number, remember what we said? Whole number means that we are going to be rounding to the ones place, because essentially that is the first value that has no decimal points included in it. So what value did they give us? They gave us 47.8 milliliters per hour. So I'm going to write that down, 47.8. With that 47.8, which number is in my ones place? That 7 is in my ones place. So we did step 1. Step 2, figure out which number is to the right. So which number is directly to the right of that 7? 8. So that 8 means that this is going to be the number that determines whether that 7 stays as a 7 or whether it rounds up as the next value up, which would be 8. Well, is 8 in that category of 5 or above or 4 or below? That's our third step. It's in that 5 or above category. So that means that that 7 is going to change up to the next value, which is an 8. So my final answer, if I round to a whole number, should be 48, and let's write our units, milliliters per hour. Okay, let's look at another example. So for question 6, okay, so I have a pediatric patient who weighs 16.7 kilograms. Round the patient's weight to the nearest whole kilogram. So we want a whole number again. So same thing as the previous question. Let's first look at the value. So I have 16.7 kilograms. So I'm going to write that down, 16.7. Which number is in my ones place? So directly to the left of the decimal point is my ones. That 6 is in my ones place. That's step 1. Step 2, which number is directly to the right? That's 7. Now, that 7 is going to determine whether I round up or down, whether that 6 stays as a 6 or whether it rounds up to the next value, which would be 7. So now the third step is figuring out what categories does that 7 fit into. Is it 5 or above or 4 or below? It's 5 or above. So that means that that 6 gets changed up to the next value, which would be 7. And if I'm rounding to a whole number, my final answer would be 17. And let's not forget our units, kilograms. Okay, let's look at question 7. So question 7, medication administration rounding. You need to administer a medication that comes in 25 milligram tablets, but the prescribed dose is 18.6 milligrams. Round the number of tablets to the nearest whole tablet. So this is one of the things that you have to know when you go into your healthcare careers. They expect you to know a few extra rounding rules, which I will mention towards the end. But here they want you to they want you to round to a whole tablet. So whole number. So here our number given is 18.6. So here 18.6, I'm going to write that down. Which number is in the whole number place value, in the place value chart? Well, we said the ones place. So the ones would be that 8. That 8 is in the ones place. And then the next step is to look directly to the right. What number is directly to the right? A 6. Step after that, determine whether the 6 is in the rounding up or rounding down category. It's in the rounding up category. So that 18 should change to 19. So your final answer should be 19. And let's not forget our milligrams. So here our answer is 19 milligrams. So you need to administer medication that comes in 25 milligram tablets, but the prescribed dose is 18.6. We rounded that to the nearest whole tablet, which is 19 milligrams. So here, essentially, we would give 1 tablet because that's the closest value. So if we're rounding to a whole number, we need to either round to here in this example, because each tablet comes in 25 milligrams. So let's say this is your tablet and total it has 25 milligrams. So based off of this value that this maximum tablet has, I can either give 1 tablet, or if I were to give 2 tablets, that would now be 50 milligrams total. 25 milligrams plus 25 milligrams would mean that I have 50 milligrams. So I'm either going to give 0 tablets, 1 tablet, or 2 tablets. Well, our final answer was 19 milligrams. So what's the closest tablet value I can give? Either I give 0 tablets, no, that's not close enough. Or 19 milligrams, is it closer to 1 tablet, 25 milligrams? Yes. So in this example, I would have had to have given 1 tablet. Okay. So now let's talk about a few rounding rules when you're looking at these healthcare career medication math problems. So one of the common ones that you will see is the drip rate and the tablets. So with the drip rate, let's talk about the drip rate first. With the drip rate, you are essentially given drops per minute as your final answer. That means that when you are looking at your IV pool and you are titrating, you're going to be able to literally count the number of drops that fall. This is common, for example, if you don't have an IV pump and you need to manually count the drops. Now, can you count part of a drop? No, you can't say that, oh, that looked like half a drop. You can't do that. So when we are doing drip rate calculations, this is a must. You have to calculate to a whole number. So let me give you an example. With drip rate, let me write it down here. And let's add an example. So when you're looking at drip rate, you might be given an example that says that your final answer was maybe 23.8 drops per minute. Now, like I was saying earlier, with drip rate, you cannot count part of a drop. The drops of water are falling. You can only count them one at a time. You cannot count part of a drop. So you have to round to a whole number. So if you were to end up with an answer like 23.8, you would have to round to a whole number. And like we were saying previously, rounding to a whole number means that you look at the ones place. Here, our ones place is that 3. We look directly to the right, that's that 8, and that 8 tells us that we round up. So my final answer, if I were doing a drip rate calculation, my final answer would have been 24 drops per minute. So that is one of those set rules that you have to know. And you sometimes are not given rounding rules when you're given the equation. It doesn't say sometimes round to the nearest whole number. This is one of those ones that you have to know. So with drip rate, you have to be able to round that to a whole number because we can't count parts of a drop. Another one that is commonly seen is in terms of tablets. So you might see that we have scored tablets. So you might see tablets that are scored like the example I was showing you earlier. You'll see a tablet and it's scored, meaning it has a line down the center. That means that you can essentially cut that tablet down the center. So with these tablets, you can either, when you see something that says score tablet, that means you can either cut it in half or give the entire tablet. You're not going to cut it in more than that because that's dangerous. You can't, you shouldn't cut it more than half because that's dangerous. You might not get a precise value. So with these ones, when they're scored tablets, the rounding rule is that you are going to either be able to cut it in half or give the entire tablet. So your answer for these should either be a whole number, for example, 4 tablets, or it can be parts of a whole number, but essentially it would be in halves. So maybe I can give 4.5 tablets, which can also be written as 4.5. So that's another rule when you're rounding, when we are looking at tablets. There are other rules that you typically look at. For example, with pediatrics, when you're giving IV fluids, you will notice that oftentimes you will want to round to the hundredths place. That is another commonly seen rule. But essentially, when we're looking at IV fluids, you're going to have to look at the value that they're telling you to round to. And many times they will, but if they don't, I would recommend that you look to your instructors for some assistance with this, because some instructors are very strict and that they want you to know specific rounding rules, and other instructors will expect you to round to the number that to the value that they give you. So if you have any questions on rounding rules, go ahead and message me below. If you're interested in seeing other videos, for example, videos on the basic concepts that you must know before you enter nursing school or any other healthcare career, make sure that you look at my other videos.